Summer camp at the Blue Ridge Mountains is always an experience. The woods are thick, the air is heavy with pine and earth, and the sound of the wind in the trees is a constant companion. As a Boy Scout, I had spent my fair share of nights out in the woods, but this night, in particular, stuck with me. I had just become an older scout, finally promoted to a position where I could play pranks on the younger guys. And every year, without fail, there was one tradition that made every first-year scout shake in their boots: the snipe hunt. For the uninitiated, a snipe is a mythical creature in Boy Scout lore. Most younger scouts think they're real, harmless, shy creatures that roam the forest at night. They're usually described as small, nocturnal birds with long beaks, but the older scouts tell tales of a much larger, terrifying female snipe that's aggressive and fiercely protective of its young. It's all a big joke, of course, but the younger scouts don't know that, and that's what makes the prank so fun. The rules are simple. The new scouts are given bags to catch the elusive snipe, and they're sent off into the woods to try their luck. Meanwhile, the older scouts, in the dark, play their parts. One of us, usually the biggest and most convincing, pretends to be attacked by a giant snipe. The noise, the chaos, it's all part of the plan to scare the living daylights out of them. It's a tradition, and it never fails. That night, everything seemed like it was going to go as planned. We gathered the first-year scouts at the designated campfire site, just as the sky started to darken. The moon was barely a sliver, and the wind was picking up, rustling the leaves. There was an eerie quiet in the air, perfect for a snipe hunt. The first years were nervous, but that's normal. They always are. We briefed them briefly on the rules of the hunt. They were eager, wide-eyed, and totally unaware of what was coming. They thought they were hunting an actual animal, a creature of the night, and they were about to get the surprise of their lives. We set out into the woods just like we had done every year before. The older scouts, myself included, carried flashlights, but we kept them off, relying on the low moonlight to guide us. We moved silently, making our way to the designated spot for the snipe attack. I had one of the first years right behind me. I could hear him trying to keep his breathing steady, but I knew he was nervous. That's the thing about pranking someone at summer camp. The whole experience gets under your skin, no matter how much you try to hide it. The silence, the shadows, the sounds of nature, it gets to you. And tonight, there was something about the air that felt different, almost too still. We reached the clearing, and it was time to set the stage. One of the older scouts, Jake, was going to play the part of the snipe attack. He had done it countless times before and knew exactly how to make it convincing. We all hid behind the trees, waiting for the moment to unfold. But then, something unexpected happened. As we were setting up the scene, one of the younger scouts, Max, let out a shout. It was loud, too loud, a scream that echoed through the woods. Bear! My blood ran cold. I froze for a moment, unsure if I had heard it right. Max had screamed, "Bear!" Not snipe, not look out, but bear. And it wasn't just a yell, it was a terrified, panicked scream. My heart pounded in my chest. The sound of it ricocheted off the trees, cutting through the night like a knife. There was no bear. We were deep in the woods, a good few miles from the camp, but Max had panicked. And now we were in trouble. I couldn't move. My mind raced. What if a bear had heard him? What if it was nearby? What if the entire camp heard the scream? We were supposed to be out here having fun, pranking the new scouts, but now everything had changed. We had barely a second to react. The night seemed to hold its breath, and then the sound of footsteps, crunching through the leaves, came toward us. Heavy, quick. Someone was running toward us. And the last person you wanted to hear running toward you in the woods at night was a camp ranger. It wasn't long before the ranger appeared, his flashlight slicing through the dark. He was breathing heavily, his boots thudding on the ground as he approached. "What's going on here?" he demanded, scanning the group with his light. I could feel the tension building in my chest. There was no way to explain this. The prank was over, the illusion shattered, and now we were in serious trouble. The camp ranger looked us over, his face grim, his eyes sharp. He was an older man, probably in his 40s, with a thick beard and a no-nonsense attitude that made me immediately regret my decision to participate in the prank. Jake, still playing his part as the snipe victim, scrambled to his feet, brushing dirt off his uniform. The rest of us tried to look innocent, but there was no hiding what had just happened. Max, the one who had yelled, looked like he was about to pass out from sheer terror. The ranger didn't waste any time. "You kids know better than this," he said, his voice low and stern. "You think this is funny? You think you're just out here playing games?" He didn't give us a chance to answer before continuing. "You scared the hell out of me, thinking there was a bear out here. I could have gotten hurt coming out here, you know that?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my mouth shut, but the adrenaline from the moment was still rushing through me. The feeling of panic, of knowing we had pushed things too far, was overwhelming. The ranger didn't let up. For what felt like an eternity, he tore into us. He was talking to everyone, but it felt like he was talking directly to me. I could feel the weight of his words pressing down on me, and I didn't know how to respond. The laughter, the joking, the prank, it all felt so stupid now. What had we done? Max, who had caused the chaos, stood there, unable to speak. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He hadn't meant to scream, but now it was too late. The prank was a disaster, and I wasn't sure if we would ever live it down. Eventually, after what felt like a lifetime, the ranger stopped. He let out a frustrated sigh and shook his head. "Go back to camp," he said, "and no more of this nonsense. You're lucky nothing worse happened." We didn't argue. We didn't even look back. We just walked away, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The campfire we had left behind was a distant memory now, and the woods that had seemed so familiar just hours ago felt alien and foreboding. The prank, the laughter, the thrill, it had all been replaced by an uncomfortable silence. I remember walking back to camp, feeling like I had just narrowly escaped a disaster. The weight of the ranger's words hung heavy in the air, and the tension of the night still clung to me. It had been the prank that almost killed us. Not because of a bear, not because of a snipe, but because we had pushed things too far. Because we had let the fun and the adrenaline cloud our judgment. That night, I learned that there were consequences to our actions. There were times when a joke could go too far, when the line between fun and danger became blurred. I thought it was just a prank, just a tradition, but it wasn't. It was a reminder that the wilderness, no matter how familiar, could be unpredictable. And sometimes, the thing that scares you the most isn't the creatures in the woods, but the people you're with, and what happens when things go wrong. By the time we reached camp, the adrenaline had worn off, leaving a strange quiet in its place. The fire was still burning, the first years were laughing, but we knew something had changed. We had pushed our luck, and we were lucky we hadn't crossed a line that couldn't be undone. The rest of the camp never found out what had really happened. We kept it to ourselves, a secret that bound the older scouts together. But every time I walked into those woods, I remembered that night, and I never took the forest for granted again. It was about 10:30 on the dot, the night air thick with that eerie stillness you only get in the woods at night. I was working at a summer camp that summer, leading a group of about 35 sixth graders on a camping trip deep in the mountains. We were out in a place with no cell service, a solid 30 to 45-minute drive from the nearest road with any reception. The ranger had warned us earlier that there had been issues with bears in the area. I'm not talking about the kind of occasional bear sighting that you shrug off. This was a real concern. They'd had reports of bears getting too close to camp, even ripping through food storage areas. So we were on high alert when it came to food, making sure everything was locked up tight. I had volunteered for the trash run, mainly because I was used to doing night hikes and didn't mind the quiet. My coworker, Matt, came with me though because he wasn't the biggest fan of being alone in the dark. We were both used to the outdoors, but even so, there was something about that night, something in the air, that made everything feel a little off. It was one of those nights where the moon was so bright that the woods around us didn't seem as dark as usual. It was almost like the trees were watching, every rustling leaf and snap of a twig amplified in the quiet. We had 2 garbage bags full of leftover s'mores to take down to the trash bins. The kids had eaten their fill, and there was no point in keeping the scraps around. We didn't have a flashlight between us, which probably wasn't the smartest move, but I figured we could see well enough under the full moon. I always thought I could see better in the dark than most people. Matt, not so much. The path to the trash cans was a little over a quarter of a mile away from the main campsite, down a narrow dirt road lined with buckbrush and thick trees. The sound of the crickets was almost deafening, and the occasional hoot of an owl or rustling in the underbrush added to the tension. I wasn't nervous, not really, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out of place. As we walked, the night seemed to hold its breath. There was a crispness to the air, but not in a refreshing way. It was unsettling. The kind of silence you get before something goes wrong. We'd been out here long enough to know the usual sounds of the woods, and everything felt just quieter than normal. Then, just as we were passing the last of the trees lining the path, we heard it. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but then the unmistakable sound of an acoustic guitar drifted through the trees. It was faint, but clear enough to hear, and it was playing something familiar, something that sent a chill up my spine. The Deliverance song. I tried to brush it off, but there was something about it, about hearing that tune in the middle of nowhere at 10:30 at night with no one else around, that made my skin crawl. It was eerie. The soft strumming mixed with the faint breeze through the trees made everything feel like it was a setup, like we were part of some twisted movie scene. The guy was playing the song just slow enough that it almost sounded like he was teasing it, as if toying with whoever might be out there. We kept walking toward the trash cans, both of us in silent agreement that we'd toss the bags and get back to camp as fast as possible. But the song didn't stop. It just kept going, faint in the distance, just loud enough to make it seem like the guy was following us. We didn't look at each other. We didn't need to. We both knew something was off, and neither of us wanted to be the one to say it. We reached the trash cans, the faint strumming of the guitar still echoing in the distance, and quickly dumped the bags. The moonlight shone down over everything, casting long shadows, and it felt like the world was holding its breath. When we turned to head back to camp, the song stopped, dead silent. Just like that, I could feel my heartbeat quicken. The air felt thicker, like it was closing in on us. We started walking back down the path, trying to get back to the kids and the safety of camp. That's when I heard it, the sound of something moving through the buckbrush to our left. At first, it was a faint rustling, like an animal, but then it became more pronounced, like something or someone was pushing through the undergrowth deliberately. The noise was too rhythmic, too purposeful. I glanced over at Matt, who was a few paces behind me. He looked back at me, his face pale in the moonlight. We both stopped. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, just listening to the noise, unsure of what to do. Then, from the darkness ahead, something emerged. A man carrying a guitar. He wasn't running or acting erratically, but there was something about the way he moved, like he was just a little too calm for the situation. His dog, a huge, jet-black Leon Burger, followed him out of the brush, its eyes reflecting the moonlight. The dog was massive, its fur thick and matted in places, but its eyes were kind, almost gentle. I was so surprised I almost didn't know what to say. The guy looked just as surprised to see us. I don't know why, but I wasn't scared anymore. Maybe it was the dog's presence, or maybe the fact that he wasn't acting aggressively. But it was definitely unsettling, seeing someone appear out of nowhere in the woods like that. The guy paused when he saw us, his guitar slung over his shoulder. He took a few steps toward us and then stopped again, as if he had just realized how close he'd gotten. His dog stood beside him, panting gently. I didn't know what to think. It was so weird. What was he doing out here in the middle of nowhere? There were no other campsites nearby, and he hadn't appeared to be looking for anything other than the path to the bathroom. But the way he had just popped out of the woods so casually was strange. Without saying a word, he just pointed down the road. I nodded, pointing toward the outhouse. He glanced at me, then at Matt, who had caught up behind me. Without a word, he turned, his dog trailing behind him, and started walking down the path. He didn't play the guitar again, not until he was a few paces away. Matt and I stood there for a few moments, unsure if we should keep walking or follow him. Eventually, we decided to keep walking, figuring it was better to get back to camp. We didn't need to be out here any longer. As we made our way back, the woods seemed quieter than ever. The song, the rustling, everything that had made the night feel off was gone. The tension from before melted away, but the weird feeling still lingered in my chest. The kind of feeling you get when you don't know if you've just had a strange encounter or narrowly avoided something dangerous. We didn't talk much as we walked back. The whole experience felt too weird to process, and I don't think either of us was sure how to explain what had just happened. But when we reached the camp, the kids were already in their tents, all tucked in for the night, and everything felt normal again. Later that night, I sat by the campfire, staring into the flames, trying to make sense of the whole thing. I don't know why, but something about that encounter stuck with me. The man with the guitar, the dog, the way they had just appeared out of nowhere, it didn't sit right. But then again, maybe it was just one of those strange things that happens in the woods. People get lost, animals wander, and sometimes things just don't make sense. The next morning, I didn't mention it to anyone. Matt didn't either. We just went on with the camp, making breakfast, helping the kids with their activities. But every time I walked past the trail where we had seen the man, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else out there. Something we hadn't seen, something still waiting in the woods. The rest of the trip passed without incident. We packed up and left the campsite without seeing the man or his dog again. The bears, thankfully, stayed away, and we made it back to civilization without any more strange encounters. But that night, every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear the faint strumming of the guitar, carried on the wind. I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened that night, but I do know this. Sometimes, the woods have a way of making the ordinary feel dangerous, and the strange feel real. It was supposed to be an adventure, a challenge, sure, but nothing we couldn't handle. The plan was simple: paddle out to our campsite on Aziscahos Lake, set up camp, and spend a few nights enjoying the solitude and beauty of the Maine wilderness. No cell service, no distractions, just good friends, fresh air, and the satisfaction of roughing it. We had done small trips before, but this was our first real backcountry camping experience. We were excited, completely unprepared, and about to get a lesson we would never forget. There were 8 of us in total, split into 3 groups. Red team had 2 people, blue team had 3, and green team had the last 3. Blue and red teams arrived earlier in the day, with green team coming later that evening after work. We had 2 kayaks and a rented canoe, and we packed as if we were moving into the woods permanently. The sheer amount of gear we had was ridiculous. We knew it would take multiple trips across the lake, but we didn't think much of it. After all, how hard could it be? The weather was perfect when we started. The sun was warm, the lake was calm, and the air smelled like pine and fresh water. We wore our swimsuits and t-shirts, figuring we'd dry off quickly if we got wet. The first leg of the trip was almost too easy. We paddled for about an hour, weaving through the coves and open water until we reached the spot we had picked out on the map. That's when we realized we had made a mistake. The campsite was at the bottom of a hill, and the entire area was a muddy mess. It was obvious that any rain would drain directly through our site. There were barely any dry spots, and trying to find level ground for the tents was nearly impossible. But this was where we had planned to camp, and we weren't about to turn back now. We unloaded the gear and set to work. Red team stayed behind to set up camp while blue team paddled back to the cars for the rest of our supplies. We figured it would take about 2 hours round trip. No big deal. We were so wrong. By the time blue team reached the cars, a light rain had started. Nothing serious, just a drizzle. We rushed to load up the rest of our supplies, stuffing gear into dry bags and balancing everything in the canoe and kayaks. Instead of paddling separately, we decided to put all 3 of us in the canoe and tow the 2 empty kayaks behind us. It seemed like a good idea at the time. A few minutes into the paddle back, the rain picked up, then the wind. What started as a light sprinkle quickly turned into a downpour. The waves on the lake grew, and the wind pushed against us, making every stroke feel like a battle. The rain was coming in sideways, stinging against our skin. Our canoe started filling with water. We had no choice but to stop. We beached the boats in front of an empty cabin along the shore and ran for cover. The cabin was locked, but the porch had a small overhang. It didn't help much. The wind was so strong it drove the rain straight onto us. We huddled together, shaking, barefoot and soaking wet. For a brief moment, we considered breaking a window to get inside. We had heard that in Maine, entering a cabin during a life-threatening emergency was legal. But we weren't quite at that level of desperation, at least not yet. Eventually, the storm eased. The wind died down, and the rain lightened to a drizzle. We bailed out the canoe, retied the kayaks, and got back on the water. We felt like survivors, like badasses. We couldn't wait to get back to camp and tell Red Team what we had just gone through. While we were struggling against the storm, Red Team was dealing with their own disaster. They had barely managed to get the tents set up before the rain hit. The ground was already soaked, and the moment the heavy rain started, a stream of water began running straight through the campsite. The dry ground was gone. One of them started digging trenches around the tents, trying to divert the water. It helped a little, but not much. The rain didn't just come down, it poured. The old tents were anything but waterproof. The seams leaked, and water began seeping in from the floor. To make matters worse, one of Red Team's members was extremely high. He had planned to just relax by the fire while waiting for the rest of us. But instead, he was curled up inside the tent, clutching a cheap folding knife, whispering about bears in the woods. The other Red Team member was doing his best to stay calm, but he was convinced that a tree branch was going to snap off and crush them in the storm. And then, as if things couldn't get worse, Blue Team was nowhere to be found. They had expected us back over an hour ago. Now, with no food, no dry clothes, and no sign of help, they had no choice but to wait it out. Blue Team was still paddling when the second round of the storm hit. This time, it was worse. We were crossing an open stretch of the lake when the first flash of lightning lit up the sky. A second later, thunder cracked so loudly it felt like the air itself was shaking. We were in a metal canoe, in the middle of a lake. We didn't even think, we just paddled straight for shore. There was no clear landing spot, just thick forest and underbrush, but we didn't care. We rammed the canoe onto the rocky shore and scrambled out, dragging the kayaks behind us. The woods were pitch black. The only time we could see anything was when the lightning flashed. We had no shoes, no flashlights, and no real idea where we were. But we knew we couldn't stay by the water. We held onto each other's shirts and started moving. We stumbled through the underbrush, tripping over roots and rocks. The rain was cold, soaking through our thin clothes. We were shivering, exhausted, and completely lost. Then, in the distance, we saw lights. A cabin. We ran. As we got closer, we heard voices, laughter, music. Relief washed over us. Then, just for a second, another thought crossed our minds. Asterisk, we are in the middle of nowhere. What if these people aren't friendly? Asterisk, we had no choice. We climbed onto the porch, soaked to the bone, shivering uncontrollably. Two men jumped up from their chairs the moment they saw us. They didn't hesitate. They pulled us inside, handing us dry clothes and towels. The cabin was full of people. Family and friends, all drunk, celebrating something. They offered us food, hot drinks, even a place to stay for the night. We were grateful, but we couldn't stay. Red team was still stranded. Green team was probably waiting at the put-in, wondering where we were. That's when the owner of the cabin mentioned something that changed everything. There was an access road leading to the lake. He offered to drive us to Green team's car, then boat us all to the campsite in his pontoon. It was the best offer we had ever received. We bushwhacked back to our boats, paddled them to the cabin's dock, and loaded everything onto the pontoon. Then we set off down the dirt road toward Green Team. When we found them, they were hotboxing the car, completely unaware of the chaos we had been dealing with. We banged on the window, scaring the hell out of them. Smoke billowed out as they rolled it down. They were way too relaxed for people stranded in a storm. We didn't waste time explaining. We just told them to follow the truck back. The moment we launched the pontoon, the storm hit again. The waves were high, the rain was sideways, and visibility was nothing. The guy's son stood at the bow, shouting directions to his dad, who was weaving through rocks and logs with only split-second warnings. After nearly running aground several times, they decided they couldn't get us to camp. Instead, they brought us back to the cabin for the night. Red team was on their own. By morning, the storm had passed. We boated back to camp, calling out as we approached. Red team crawled out of their soaked tents, looking like they had survived a war. The entire campsite was destroyed. Mud, puddles, collapsed tents. And to top it off, they had used all of our dry clothes to block the leaks. No one blamed them. We were just glad to be together again. That was 8 years ago. We've gone back every year since with better gear and smarter planning. But no matter how much we prepare, nothing will ever compare to that first trip, the night we learned just how bad things could get. I wasn't new to camping. I had been on plenty of trips before, short ones, long ones, solo, and with friends. But this time was different. I had planned a solo trip deep into the woods, farther than I had ever gone before. The idea was to disconnect for a few days, breathe in the fresh air, and just enjoy being alone. No phone calls, no emails, no noise from the city. Just me, nature, and the quiet. I had mapped out my route weeks in advance. I'd hike in about 15 miles, find a good spot near a small lake, set up camp, and spend 3 nights there before heading back. I packed light but had everything I needed: tent, sleeping bag, plenty of food, a water filter, a good knife, and a first aid kit. My gear was solid and I felt confident. The first day of hiking went smoothly. The trail was well worn at first, but as I got deeper into the forest, it became rougher, less maintained. I didn't mind. I liked the idea of being far from other people. I had a GPS with me, but I also had a printed map in case something happened. By late afternoon, I reached the lake. It was perfect. The water was still and clear, reflecting the trees around it. There was a small clearing a little off the shore that looked ideal for setting up my tent. I dropped my pack, stretched my legs, and got to work. Within an hour, I had my tent pitched, my sleeping bag laid out inside, and a small fire going. I ate a quick meal, sat by the fire for a while, and just listened to the sounds of the forest. Birds, the occasional rustling in the bushes, the gentle lapping of water against the shore. It was peaceful. I slept well that night. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling refreshed. I boiled some water for coffee, ate a simple breakfast, and decided to explore a little. I didn't plan to go far, just follow the lake's edge and see if there were any good spots to fish. About an hour into my walk, I found something odd, a pile of sticks, arranged in a pattern, almost like a symbol. At first, I figured it was nothing, maybe just the way they had fallen. But as I kept walking, I found another pile, and then another, each one carefully placed, not random. It made me uneasy. I wasn't superstitious, but something about it felt off, like someone had put them there on purpose. But I hadn't seen any signs of other people, no footprints, no fishing gear, nothing. I pushed the thought aside and kept walking. After a while, I found a good fishing spot and spent some time casting my line. I caught a couple of small fish, enough for dinner, and made my way back to camp. As I got closer, something felt different. The air seemed heavier, the silence too deep. When I stepped into the clearing, I stopped. My tent was open. I always zipped it shut. Always. But now the flap was halfway unzipped, swaying slightly. My stomach tightened. I scanned the area, looking for any signs of movement. Nothing. I walked up slowly, knife in hand, peered inside. Everything was still there, my sleeping bag, my pack, my food. Nothing looked touched, but the fact that the tent had been opened at all made my skin crawl. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe I had forgotten to zip it all the way. Maybe the wind had pulled it open. But deep down, I knew that wasn't likely. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was just being paranoid. I cooked my fish, ate quickly, and made sure my fire was strong before getting into my tent. I double-checked the zipper, made sure my knife was within reach, and tried to sleep. But I kept waking up. Every little noise outside made me tense. A branch snapping, leaves rustling, the wind shifting. My mind kept going back to those sticks, those strange patterns. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I made a decision I would leave early. I had planned for 3 nights, but something didn't feel right. I wasn't about to ignore my instincts. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, making sure I didn't leave anything behind. The air felt different that morning. Still, heavy, like the forest itself was watching me. As I started walking back, I felt it, that feeling, like I wasn't alone. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the longer I walked, the stronger it got. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the trees, looking for anything out of place. Then I saw it, a figure just barely visible between the trees. Too far to make out details, but close enough that I knew it was a person. I froze. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching. My heart pounded. I forced myself to keep walking, to act like I hadn't seen them. My mind raced. Who was out here? Why were they watching me? I picked up my pace. My legs burned as I pushed forward, trying to get back to the main trail as fast as possible. Every few minutes, I checked behind me. The figure was gone, but the feeling wasn't. I knew they were still there. I walked for hours, barely stopping. I didn't eat, didn't rest. I just wanted to get out. The deeper into the forest I went, the more paranoid I became. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow looked like someone standing there. Then, as I reached a small clearing, I saw something that made my blood run cold. More sticks, arranged in a pattern, right in the middle of the trail. Fresh. Someone had been here. Recently. Panic surged through me. I didn't stop. I kept moving, forcing my legs to keep going even though I was exhausted. I had to get out. By the time I reached my car, I was drenched in sweat, my body shaking. I threw my gear into the back seat, locked the doors, and peeled out of there as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back in civilization, surrounded by people. Only then did I let myself breathe. I never found out who was out there. I never figured out what those symbols meant. But I know this: someone was watching me that night. Someone had been near my camp. And whoever they were, they didn't want me there. I haven't gone camping alone since. It was supposed to be just another weekend getaway. A camping trip with a group of friends. Nothing too complicated. Just a few days spent in the woods, drinking around a campfire, talking about life, and maybe pushing our limits a little, as we often did. There were 8 of us, 4 girls and 4 guys. All of us were around 18 or 19 years old, and we'd gone camping in this particular area outside of the national park countless times before. It was a spot we always used, just over a small fence and a short walk from the parking area. Nothing too fancy, but it was quiet, isolated, and most importantly, familiar. But when we arrived that day, we found our usual spot was already taken. I could see them right away, about 20 boys and 10 girls, all around our age. They were hard to miss. They stood out for all the wrong reasons. Loud, boisterous, and clearly not the type of people you'd want to cross paths with in a place like this. Their presence set my nerves on edge, but we had no choice but to walk by them and keep moving. As we passed their campsite, a few of them stared, their gazes lingering too long for comfort. I felt a cold chill creep down my spine, but I ignored it. We just kept walking, trying to get as far away from them as possible. The air felt heavy, tense. It wasn't just their presence. It was the whole vibe of the place. Something about it didn't sit right with me. It's a feeling I get sometimes when the energy in the air shifts. Felt like we were being watched. We pushed on, finding a quieter spot further into the woods. We set up our tents, unpacked the gear, and started a fire. After a while, the feeling of unease faded a little. We started drinking, laughing, and the normal chatter of our group began to fill the space again. By around 11 p.m., the night was fully settled in. It was pitch black, except for the flickering firelight that cast strange shadows around us. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the trees loomed like dark sentinels around our campsite. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves and branches, but otherwise it was quiet. Too quiet. That's when I first heard it. Giggling. It wasn't loud or anything, but it was enough to cut through the silence. At first, I thought it was one of the girls laughing at something, but it wasn't. It was coming from the trees. I glanced around at my friends, but none of them seemed to have noticed. It was strange, disorienting, and my stomach dropped a little as I turned to look into the woods, trying to see what was making the noise. I reached for my flashlight, one of those ridiculously bright ones that could practically light up the whole forest, and clicked it on. The beam sliced through the darkness, and for a second, I saw nothing. Just the trees, their twisted branches stretching like hands reaching into the sky. And then there they were, 2 figures crawling low to the ground almost like animals. The light hit them and they froze. Their faces were twisted into strange, unnerving grins. I couldn't see them clearly at first, but I could tell they weren't anyone from our group. I watched as the 2 of them stood up, laughing even harder, as if the whole thing was some kind of sick joke. The giggling didn't stop. They just stood there, laughing under their breath, not bothering to move away. It was too weird. Something about the way they looked at us, their eyes glinting in the flashlight's beam, made me feel like they were toying with us, like we were nothing more than a source of amusement for them. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. "Do you see that?" One of the girls whispered, her voice barely audible, but I could hear the unease in it. "Yeah," I muttered, still staring at the figures. "What the hell?" And then, as if they were done with us, they turned and disappeared back into the trees, leaving us in stunned silence. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, like they were still out there, waiting for us to make a move. We didn't talk about it at first. The tension in the air was too thick, too palpable. Instead, we just went back to our circle around the fire, trying to ignore the feeling that we weren't alone. But it didn't end there. About 10 minutes later, I heard something. A crash. A bottle shattering on the ground just a few feet away from our circle. Everyone froze. "What the hell?" one of the guys shouted, jumping to his feet. I could see the confusion and fear in his eyes. Another bottle crashed to the ground. Then another. They were being thrown from the darkness of the woods, and I could see the reflections of the broken glass glinting in the firelight. It was no accident. Whoever was out there was deliberately trying to get our attention. "Call the cops," one of the girls said, her voice trembling. She had already fumbled for her phone and was frantically dialing. When she finally got through, the response was less than reassuring. "We're off-grid," the operator said, sounding as if they couldn't care less. "There's nothing we can do. You're on your own." That was it. Just like that, no help was coming. We were completely isolated, and I could feel the panic setting in. We quickly decided to stand our ground. It was a stupid idea, I knew that, but it felt like the only choice. We lined up with our backs to the lock, the dark water just behind us. We spread out a little, each of us holding something. Sticks, a couple of knives, a hatchet that we'd brought for chopping wood. I was holding the hatchet, my grip tight, my knuckles white. I never thought I'd be in a situation where I'd actually need to use it. The next few minutes felt like they stretched on forever. We stayed still, watching the trees, listening for any sound. The giggling had stopped, but the tension was unbearable. Then we saw them. Two figures moved through the trees, barely visible in the dark, but unmistakably human. The flashlight beam illuminated them briefly, and for a moment, they stopped. They must not have expected us to be waiting for them. I couldn't tell how many there were at first, maybe 4 or 5, but it was hard to say in the dark. The only thing that was certain was that we were vastly outnumbered. One of them stepped forward from the shadows, and for a brief second, everything went quiet. My heart was pounding in my chest, my thoughts racing. It felt like everything was about to spiral out of control. My grip tightened on the hatchet, and I could feel my breath coming in short gasps. They didn't approach us right away. There was a brief pause, an uncomfortable silence. I wondered if they had weapons, knives, maybe something more. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they moved closer, but they stopped again. The guy who'd stepped forward looked us over, and for a moment, I thought he was going to make a move. But then he hesitated, just long enough for the tension to build even more. I could hear my friends behind me, barely breathing. And then, as quickly as it all started, the situation started to defuse. One of the guys from their group spoke, and although I couldn't hear the words, it was clear they weren't coming to fight. They weren't looking for trouble, at least not yet. Slowly, the tension eased, but not without leaving a heavy weight in the air. They weren't as crazy as we had thought, but it had been a close call. We all stayed up for a while longer, eyes darting to the trees every so often, just in case. But the night passed without any further incidents. We didn't sleep much, but by morning, we were packed up and ready to leave. Looking back, I still don't know if we made the right choice standing our ground, but I know we came away with a lesson. In the woods, you're never truly alone. There are always eyes watching, always people who might just be waiting for the right moment to strike. I don't think I'll be going back to that spot again anytime soon. I was exhausted. My whole body ached from the days we had spent backpacking through the Grand Canyon. Muscles tight, feet sore, skin caked with a layer of sweat and Red Canyon dust. My pack had been digging into my shoulders all day, and even after setting it down for the night, I could still feel the weight pressing on my back. But we were almost done. Tomorrow, we would begin our final ascent out of the canyon, climbing our way back to the rim. Tonight, though, was our last night at Horseshoe Mesa. The sun had set behind the cliffs hours ago, the sky shifting from deep red to dark blue and finally to a vast black canvas, speckled with stars. No moon tonight, just stars, endless stars stretching across the sky in every direction. I had never seen a sky so open before this trip. No city lights washing out the details, just darkness and pinpricks of cold white light. We were spread out in our bivy sacks, lying on the hard ground. No tents, just a thin layer of fabric wrapped around our sleeping bags. It was lighter, more practical for backpacking, but it also meant we were exposed. Nothing between us and the open air. Nothing between us and whatever else was out there. I could hear the others shifting around, getting comfortable in their bags. The dirt beneath me was packed firm, a mix of loose gravel and sand. My body ached, but it was a good ache, the kind that made you feel like you had done something real, something earned. Lying on my back, staring up at the sky, I replayed the last few days in my head. The miles of rugged trails, the steep descents, the endless switchbacks, the moments of quiet where all I could hear was my own breath and the crunch of boots on stone. The Grand Canyon was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was beautiful, massive, ancient, but it also felt empty in a way I couldn't quite put into words. Not just vast, but hollow. We knew there were other backpackers somewhere on the mesa. We hadn't seen them, but with the number of permits issued for this area, we knew they had to be around. Probably camped on the other side, beyond our line of sight. The land was big enough to spread out, and most people liked their space. I listened to the wind rustling through the dry grass, the occasional loose rock tumbling somewhere in the distance. The sounds of the canyon at night were different from the day, more isolated. The air had a stillness to it, a kind of hush that made every small noise stand out. Slowly, my body relaxed, my breathing steadied, my eyes grew heavy. Then a sound, footsteps, slow, deliberate. I wasn't fully awake yet. I thought maybe I had imagined it, that my brain was still drifting somewhere between sleep and consciousness. But then I heard it again, the distinct crunch of a foot pressing down on dry grass and loose gravel. Someone was walking through our camp. I froze, my mind instantly alert. My heart thudded against my ribs as my ears strained to listen. Crunch, pause, crunch. The steps were unhurried, measured. Not the erratic movement of an animal sniffing around. Not the hurried shuffle of a lost hiker trying to find their way. This was something else. I tried to turn my head, but my body felt sluggish. The bivy sack around me suddenly felt too tight, like I had been wrapped up too snug, trapped inside a cocoon of fabric. My arms were pinned against my sides, and if I wanted to move, I would have to struggle to get free. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring straight up at the sky, my breaths coming slow and shallow. The footsteps continued, weaving through our camp. Whoever it was, they weren't stumbling around. They weren't hesitating. They were walking right between us. I could feel them moving past me, not close enough to touch, but close enough that I could sense them. I willed my eyes to adjust, searching the darkness for any sign of movement. It was almost impossible to see anything without a moon. The only way I could tell where they were was by the way the stars disappeared and reappeared as they moved. For a moment, I thought about speaking up, saying something, but what was I supposed to say? Hey, that didn't seem right. Who are you? What if they didn't answer? What if they did? My throat was dry. My tongue felt thick. I stayed silent. Then, as slowly as they had come, the footsteps faded. The figure moved away, vanishing into the dark. I didn't hear them leave. No sound of a pack shifting, no rustle of gear. just footsteps and then nothing. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, listening. Nothing. Eventually, exhaustion took over, dragging me back down into an uneasy sleep. I woke up to the warmth of the sun on my face, the first light of dawn creeping over the canyon walls. For a moment, I thought I had dreamed the whole thing. Then I saw the others. They were already awake, sitting up in their sleeping bags, looking around. Their faces were tense, their movements stiff. One by one, we shared the same story. We had all been awake. We had all heard the footsteps. We had all seen the silhouette moving between us. And none of us had said a word. We checked our packs. Nothing was missing. No signs of disturbance. It was like the night before had never happened. But it did. We knew it did. There were only so many people allowed to camp here at a time. Horseshoe Mesa wasn't a place where you just wandered through in the middle of the night. It was remote, isolated. If someone was out there walking through our camp, they had a reason. But we would never know what it was. We packed up our gear in silence, shouldered our heavy packs, and started the long climb back to the rim. With every step, I kept thinking about that moment in the dark. The quiet, steady footsteps, the way the stars blinked out as they passed, the way none of us spoke, and the way they had just left. I never looked back. I don't usually scare easily. I've spent enough nights outside, whether for fun or because the army told me to, that most sounds in the dark don't bother me. But every now and then, nature has a way of reminding you that you're just another animal out there. And sometimes it does so in a way that makes your skin crawl. This is about 2 different nights, 2 separate moments that had my heart pounding for entirely different reasons. One was just me and a skunk. The other, me and a bunch of wild hogs. Both of them could have gone south fast, and both of them taught me something important about patience, about luck, and about just how vulnerable you really are when you close your eyes in the dark woods. I had just bought the hammock a week before. Nothing fancy, just something lightweight and sturdy enough to sling between a couple of trees and relax in. It was one of those nights where the air was still, the kind where you can hear every single rustle in the leaves and every little creak of the branches above you. The woods weren't silent, but they weren't noisy either. A few distant crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, but nothing close enough to be concerning. I had picked a nice, quiet spot, a couple of trees spaced just right apart, a decent clearing beneath me so I wouldn't be lying over any brush or jagged rocks. I was about 2 feet off the ground, enough to keep me away from most crawling things, but low enough that getting in and out wouldn't be a hassle. I wasn't planning on sleeping there all night, just hanging out, enjoying the quiet. The fabric of the hammock cradled me as I lay back, arms crossed behind my head. I had my flashlight, my knife, and my keys clipped to my belt. I wasn't expecting trouble, but old habits die hard. The smell of pine and earth was strong in the air, mixed with the faint scent of the campfire from earlier. I closed my eyes, not asleep but not entirely awake either. And then I felt it, a shift in the air, presence. It wasn't a sound that tipped me off at first. It was the feeling of something moving close, the kind of awareness that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. I opened my eyes slowly, careful not to move, and focused downward. Right beneath me, inches away, was a skunk. It wasn't moving fast. It wasn't scared. It was just sniffing around, its tiny black nose twitching as it investigated whatever scent had drawn it in. I could just barely make out the white stripe running down its back in the dim light. I don't know if you've ever been truly frozen in place, not because you physically can't move, but because you know that one wrong move will end badly. That was me in that moment. Every muscle locked up, every breath shallow and controlled. My brain was running through every possible outcome at lightning speed. If I scared it, it would spray. If I shifted too much, it might think I was a threat. The worst part? I had no idea how long it would stay. Seconds stretched into minutes. My back was already aching from keeping still, but I didn't dare adjust. I could hear its tiny claws scratching at the dirt beneath me, sniffing, circling. I started thinking about my options. I had nothing to throw, no way to get it to move without making it think I was attacking. Then my fingers brushed against my keys. It was a risk, a stupid, desperate little risk. Slowly, with the kind of movement that feels like it takes hours instead of seconds, I unclipped them from my belt loop. Just a tiny shake, a little jingle, nothing loud, nothing sudden. The skunk froze. I held my breath. And then, after what felt like forever, it turned and waddled off into the darkness. I didn't move for a long time after that. Just lay there, staring up at the sky, my heart pounding against my ribs. It was over, but my body hadn't caught up to the fact yet. I didn't see it again after that. Didn't hear it either. It was just gone. Eventually, I swung my legs over and sat up, stretching my arms, feeling the tension release from my body. I laughed a little quietly to myself. It wasn't funny, but somehow it felt like it was. That kind of laugh you get when you realize just how close you came to something awful happening. I never hung my hammock that low again. The second story is a different kind of fear. The kind that doesn't hit you until later when you have time to think about how badly things could have gone. Army training doesn't exactly come with luxury accommodations. You sleep where you can, when you can, and comfort isn't part of the deal. That night, we had been moving all day, no rest, and by the time we could finally set up for the night, exhaustion had taken over completely. It was the kind of tired where thinking straight wasn't even an option. I picked a tree, dropped my gear, and laid down. That was it. No real thought to it. It was dark, pitch black because of noise and light discipline, and any tree was as good as any other. I barely registered the rustling of my buddies doing the same around me. All I cared about was getting some sleep before we had to be up again. I don't know how long I was out before I heard it. A rustling, a low grunt, not close but not far either. I ignored it at first. Could have been anything. A possum, a raccoon, another guy shifting in his sleep. But then I heard it again, louder this time, more distinct, winking. It took a second for my brain to put the pieces together. My body wanted to stay asleep, but my instincts were waking up fast. I wasn't near just any tree. I was near a den, a wild hog den. I didn't move. Unlike the skunk, this wasn't a matter of avoiding a bad smell. This was a matter of avoiding getting torn up by a bunch of territorial pigs that wouldn't take kindly to some idiot humans sprawling out near their home. I listened, counted the sounds. There were at least 3 of them. Maybe more. I could hear them shifting, breathing, snorting. They weren't in a frenzy, which meant they weren't too bothered by me yet. Either they hadn't noticed, or they had but didn't see me as a threat. So I did the only thing I could do. I went back to sleep. It wasn't a peaceful sleep, but it was sleep nonetheless. In the morning, when the light started creeping in, I finally got a good look at where I had chosen to bed down. Less than 10 feet away was the entrance to a burrow. The dirt around it was packed with hoof prints. Bits of chewed-up vegetation were scattered around. The kind of place that screamed not where you want to sleep. And yet, somehow I stood up slowly, my muscles sore from the stiffness of the night. My gear was untouched, my body unharmed. The hogs were gone, likely off foraging now that the sun was rising. I stared at that den for a long moment, processing just how lucky I had been. Some of those hogs have tusks. Some of them are aggressive. And yet, just like the skunk, they had decided to leave me alone. Maybe I stank too much. Maybe they were just tired. Either way, I wasn't about to push my luck again. That night stuck with me for a long time. Not because of what happened, but because of what didn't. There's a fine line between surviving something and never realizing how close you came to danger in the first place. That night, I walked that line, and from then on, I always checked the ground a little more carefully before picking a spot to sleep. I had been working in the Tetons for a while, and every chance I got, I would go off on my own, away from the tourists and busy trails. I didn't care for crowded campsites or the hum of distant conversations. I wanted real solitude, the kind where you don't see another person for miles, where the only sounds are the wind through the trees and the occasional crack of a branch under an animal's foot. This time, I had planned a solo backpacking trip on the backside of the Tetons. It was late summer and the days were still long, but the nights had that sharp mountain chill. My pack was loaded with the essentials: tent, sleeping bag, a small stove, and enough food to last me a few days. I had my bear spray strapped to my hip and a knife in my pocket. Out here, being prepared wasn't just about comfort. It was about survival. The first day was a steady climb. The trail was barely visible in places, overgrown from lack of use. I had to push through thick brush, stepping carefully over fallen logs and loose rocks. Every so often, I'd stop to take in the view. The Tetons stretched out behind me, jagged peaks cutting into the sky. Below, a river snaked through the valley, glinting in the late afternoon sun. I hadn't seen another soul since I left the main trail that morning. Just how I liked it. As the sun started dipping behind the mountains, I found the perfect spot to set up camp. A flat patch of ground near a cliff's edge, overlooking a vast expanse of wilderness. The drop was sheer, at least a few hundred feet straight down. The full moon was rising, its light reflecting off the rock face. It was one of those moments that reminded me why I did this. No noise, no distractions, just me and the mountains. I set up my tent, cooked a quick meal, and sat on a rock near the cliff, letting the cool breeze wash over me. It was one of those nights where everything felt calm, almost too calm. The kind of silence that makes you aware of every little sound. The rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the occasional crack of a twig in the darkness. I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipped up my tent, and closed my eyes. I don't know how long I had been asleep when the sound jolted me awake. A chorus of high-pitched howls surrounded my tent, so close that I could hear the individual voices blending into one eerie, wavering cry. My heart started pounding. Coyotes, a whole pack of them. I stayed completely still, my breath shallow. The howls turned to yips and barks, moving in a loose circle around me. I could hear their paws rustling the grass, their bodies shifting in the darkness. They weren't just passing through, they were surrounding me. I knew coyotes weren't usually dangerous to humans, but this many, this close, it wasn't normal. I swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and did the only thing I could think of. I clapped my hands together as loud as I could. The response was immediate. The yipping stopped, followed by the rapid thudding of paws retreating into the night. I lay there, heart still hammering, listening as the sounds faded into the distance. I waited, ears straining for any sign of them returning, but all I heard was the wind. Eventually, I let out a shaky breath and closed my eyes again. Sleep didn't come easy after that. The next morning, I packed up and continued my hike. My plan was to explore some of the less traveled areas, following old service roads and game trails that weren't on any map. I liked the feeling of discovering something that few others had seen. By midday, I had reached a dense section of forest, the kind where sunlight barely touches the ground. The air was cool and damp, the scent of pine thick around me. I moved carefully, watching for loose rocks or hidden roots that could send me sprawling. That's when I saw it. A narrow trail branching off from the one I was on. It was barely more than a thin path of trampled grass, winding through the trees. Probably a game trail, made by elk or deer moving through the area. I decided to follow it. At first, it was just like any other animal path, narrow, uneven, weaving through the trees in no particular direction. Then I started noticing the bones. Small at first, a few scattered ribs, a femur half buried in the dirt. Nothing unusual. Predators killed here. Animals died. That was nature. But as I kept walking, the bones became more frequent. Larger. A moose leg stripped clean. A deer skull with the antlers still attached. Tendrils of dried sinew clinging to hollow sockets. Then I turned a corner and saw the clearing. Took me a moment to process what I was looking at. Severed limbs. Everywhere. Moose and deer. Their legs torn from their bodies. Scattered like discarded trash. Some were fresh, the meat still red and glistening. Others were old, picked clean down to the bone. The air was thick with the sour stench of decay. And then I saw the tree. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its bark shredded in long, deep gashes. Claw marks. High up, higher than I could reach. Bare. My stomach tightened. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just some random kill site. This was a bear's cache. A place where a grizzly had been feeding, and I was standing right in the middle of it. I looked down. Fresh bear scat. Large. Still wet. The bear wasn't just passing through. It had been here recently, maybe even today. A cold wave of fear washed over me. I needed to leave. Now, I turned slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. Running was the worst thing I could do. If the bear was nearby, any sudden movement might trigger a chase. Step by step, I retraced my path, forcing myself to breathe evenly. My fingers tightened around my bear spray, thumb resting on the safety clip. Every shadow between the trees looked like a bear. Every sound, branches shifting, leaves rustling, made my pulse spike. I walked like that for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. Then I saw it, an opening between the trees, the game trail merging back onto the main path. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I just kept moving, faster now, until the dense forest was behind me and I was out in the open again. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding. I never saw the bear, but I knew it had been close. Too close. That was the last time I ever followed an unmarked game trail in the Tetons. Some places aren't meant to be explored.